Hey guys, in today's video, I'm going to comment on the trustworthiness of Korean sunscreens. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Andrea. I'm a board certified dermatologist. I'd love it if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the thumbs up. It really helps my videos out a lot. All right, so you may have heard there has been a lot of scrutiny of different Korean sunscreens over the past several months. It all started with the Purito Centella Green Level Unscented SPF 50+. If you're not familiar with that sunscreen, it is a chemical sunscreen from Korea. And initially it was really popular because it's very lightweight, fast absorbing, nice and moisturizing, doesn't look too greasy on the skin. It is a chemical sunscreen, so it doesn't leave a cast. And the sunscreen ingredients in that product are Uvinol A+, a broad spectrum UVA filter, and Uvinol T150, a UVB filter. Yours truly reviewed this sunscreen, I think in September, was it? September 16th, I think, 2019. And at that time, I had been trying out the Purito sunscreen myself. I found it a nice moisturizer, but I was a little suspicious of the product in terms of its UVA protection because it only had one UVA filter. Now, you can't really tell how good a sunscreen is going to be in terms of protecting you against anything just based on the ingredients. I was suspicious though because honestly all chemical sunscreens that I've ever encountered, they tend to have more filters. So I was a little suspicious that just 2 filters, how did they make a product that lightweight, that fast absorbing with so few filters? So I was suspicious and I said, hey, at the end of the day, I think this is a good moisturizer. It's a good sunscreen maybe for just kind of day-to-day use while you're mostly indoors, but I wouldn't rely on it if you're gonna be outdoors for a prolonged period of time. Fast forward, well, a lot of people started reporting burning, sunburn with this particular sunscreen, and one individual became very suspicious of it. The founder of something called the INSI Decoder. It's like a blog website that kind of goes through different skincare ingredients, and I think they have product reviews. I'm honestly not that familiar with this site. Anyways, they became suspicious, sent the sunscreen to an independent lab for two separate tests to assay the SPF and the sun protection of the product. An in vitro test, which means in a dish or in a test tube, and then an in vivo test, which means actually on human skin. And the product, based on this testing, it was revealed that it actually isn't the SPF 50 as they claim, it's SPF 19. However, you have to be suspicious of third-party testing. There are a lot of variables that go into formulating a sunscreen and then confirming the SPF, which is the ability of the sunscreen to protect you against the burning UVB rays, and also a lot of limitations of the testing in order to determine the degree of UVA protection. UVA are those rays that penetrate the skin very deeply, destroy collagen, and also contribute to skin cancer formation. All right, so initially this individual or entity, this INSI Decoder, they came out that they got these test results back and they publicized it on their social media, and that created outrage. People claiming that Purito was being deceptive and lying about their SPF. However, this kind of thing is not necessarily new in the realm of sunscreen. Third-party, independent consumer testing of sunscreens is something that's been going on for a while, and it's not just Korean sunscreens. A lot of sunscreens from the US, throughout Europe and Australia have come under scrutiny from different consumer interest groups. And a while back, actually, I put out a video telling you guys to not really fall for the hype around the Consumer Reports testing. 2016, I think it was, Consumer Reports tested several American sunscreens, US sunscreens, and found that they didn't meet the SPF that they claimed to have. But as I point out in that video, they didn't necessarily follow the proper protocol. There were several limitations, and they don't really disclose everything about how the testing that they did took place. They're not the only ones. A group, Hong Kong Consumer Council, actually did a similar thing in 2020. They looked at Japanese, Korean, and some Western sunscreens, found out that many of them did not did not match up the SPF that they claimed. And then in 2015, an Australian study looked at 6 sunscreens and only 2 of them actually met the label claim. And then a study of European sunscreens found that of 41, only 7 out of 41 products actually didn't match the claim. So you can see this is kind of a thing. It's not unique to the Korean sunscreens. It's something that has happened before, where these consumer interest groups, they go out and they independently test the SPF and it doesn't match up. And that, you know, creates this kind of outrage. Are the companies lying to us? Are they being deceptive? Should we sue? Anger, etc. Unfortunately, when it comes to determining the SPF of a sunscreen, it's again the measure of how well it's going to protect you against a burn. There is a lot of variability that goes into the test. It's done on human skin, and if you think about it, that's going to vary quite a bit depending on the region of the world where the SPF testing is being done. For example, sunscreen SPF testing done in Asia, you're going to get more medium skin tones in those countries, as opposed to in maybe certain areas in Europe and the US, you're going to get more Fitzpatrick phototype 2 and 1. So you can see right off the bat, you know, there are going to be some issues. It's just you know, every test out there, no matter the test in science, it's going to have issues with repeatability, reproducibility, and this is one example, SPF. So it's nothing new at the end of the day. This whole thing with the Purito, it happens a lot. After the Purito scandal, as I call it, a lot of other Korean skincare companies started looking very critically at their SPF and trying to go out and, you know, repeat SPF testing, and similarly found that their SPFs were not matching up what they originally tested to be. I think Bonabaji pulled theirs. Dear Claire's pulled theirs, and I think Crave Beauty's Beat Shield also is on hold. So they, you know, it caused these Korean skincare brands to take another look at their sunscreens, re-assay them, remeasure them, and, you know, they did in fact find some discrepancies. So does that make Korean sunscreens not trustworthy? Absolutely not. You know, you could run into this issue with any sunscreen from anywhere around the world. Again, as I said, there are several limitations with how SPF testing is performed. So that limits sometimes the reproducibility of the results. Looking back on it now, I think one of the reasons why Asian sunscreens have, you know, a lot of Korean sunscreens have maybe only 2 filters, is that sunscreen is actually a lot more popular in Korea and other Asian countries than it is in the Western world. People wear it daily, as you should. And because of that, there's more of a desire for different sunscreen products that are maybe more lightweight, not as heavy. And that ultimately can, you know, result in an SPF that is not as robust and is not as long lasting. But in these situations, people are not using these to go to the beach, which in my original video is something I think I pointed out, that this is a good sunscreen for kind of everyday use, mostly as a moisturizer with a little bit of SPF in it, but don't rely on it exclusively as your sunscreen. I want to make it crystal clear though that you can run into this issue with sunscreen from anywhere around the world. US, Canada, throughout Europe, throughout Asia. It's not a Korean sunscreen issue. Can you actually trust sunscreen then? I mean, if you are using sunscreens that claim to have an SPF, how can you actually trust that? You simply have to. And understand that in some cases, you may run into batch to batch variation. And in some cases, it may actually be lower. But using a sunscreen daily, regardless, can still protect you from not only the burning rays, but also UVA rays. We know that applying an SPF 15 sunscreen every single day can result in substantially less photo damage after 4.5 years in comparison to people who just use sunscreen intermittently. And therefore, you know, even if something claims to be SPF 50 or 100 and it happens to be on an offshoot that due to batch variations or limitations in the way the testing was performed, it's actually less than that, you're still likely going to get some protection from that product. Think of it this way. We eat food in our diet, and from time to time, we find out that certain companies, their product may have been contaminated. There may have been an outbreak. For example, cantaloupe, frequently there's an outbreak of listeria in cantaloupe. It doesn't mean we stop eating. Similarly, sunscreen, it's going to have limitations. It's going to have faults. And that doesn't mean that we should stop wearing sunscreen or stop trusting sunscreen. It's simply, you know, one other thing that you use to protect your skin from the damaging effects of ultraviolet radiation. However, sunscreen is never the only thing that you should gravitate towards. You also always need to be mindful of the amount of sun exposure you're getting. You don't want to be out in midday sun for a prolonged period of time. That increases the risk of a lot of UV damage to the skin. You also want to make sure that you're using things like sun protective clothing, broad brimmed hats, long sleeves. Never sunbathe. That, you know, it's just stacking up those pyrimidine dimers, DNA mutations. Always reapply your sunscreen too. Unfortunately, you know, people don't apply enough, and that's why we recommend reapplying. But again, the sunscreen should not be the only thing that you reach for your sun protection. It needs to be all-inclusive. For example, you wouldn't spray yourself with a flame retardant and jump into a fire pit, right? Same thing with sunscreen. Don't just put on sunscreen and think that that is good enough. Historically, this actually was a big problem when sunscreen first came out, is that it actually led people to stay out in the sun too long and get too much UV exposure. And therefore, you know, we recommend, that's why we really emphasize in public health messages, limiting your sun exposure, seeking shade, using additional measures like sun protective clothing, hats, sunglasses, etc. The sunscreen piece is merely something else to help you out and to help your skin and to help protect your skin. And it's data driven with evidence not only to minimize some of the damaging effects of UV that lead to photo damage and the visible signs of photoaging, but also to reduce the burden of DNA mutations and skin damage that ultimately can lead to skin cancers. It's also super important for people who have a deeper skin tone, who may be at less risk for certain types of skin cancers. They also need to be wearing sunscreen daily because there are other damaging effects to those skin types from UV, things like hyperpigmentation and flaring of certain photosensitive diseases. So it's a really important thing that everyone needs to do every single day. And yes, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. There are going to be limitations in sunscreen. Most people don't apply enough. It's sticky. And the way the skin is, it's a 3D structure. It's not a flat sheet. So a lot of times you put sunscreen on, their epidermal markings. This is why we tell people to reapply it. I mean, it's got a lot of limitations, but when done daily as a habit, it adds up and it makes a huge difference, not only for the visible signs of photoaging, but also for reducing your skin cancer risk. How do you choose a sunscreen? What is the best sunscreen? This is a question I get all the time. Short answer, the best sunscreen is the one that you actually will put on every day and use and that you like. Point blank. That is it. That is it. It's not about analyzing ingredients or, you know, trying to choose one from a specific country because you believe that, you know, their filters are better or whatever. Honestly, it's about you and you actually wearing it, and it will yield benefit. So that is the short answer. However, you know, you can get a little bit more technical as far as what you're going to want to choose. There are two types of sunscreens, mineral sunscreen and chemical sunscreen. Mineral sunscreens have zinc and or titanium dioxide. If you're going to choose a mineral sunscreen, it offers the advantages of that. They tend to be less irritating to the skin, especially for people who have very sensitive skin. And the advantage of mineral sunscreen is that they're often easier to tolerate around the eyes where the skin is more delicate. Mineral sunscreens, though, you want to make sure they have zinc oxide in them, because titanium dioxide, the other mineral ingredient, it is not as good at protecting against UVA. You really need the zinc piece in there. So that's one option. And then the other option is a chemical sunscreen. And that's going to be variable, honestly, from country to country. Here in the US, our chemical sunscreens, they have good filters in them for UVB protection, protecting us from a burn, but we only have one filter in our chemical sunscreens to protect us from UVA, those rays that contribute to a lot of skin aging and damage. And avobenzone is a fine ingredient, but it's not very stable. And therefore, if you are in the US and you're gonna choose a chemical sunscreen, I encourage you to go to a brand that is very reputable, specifically Neutrogena or La Roche-Posay. Those are some of the best chemical sunscreens. Why? They put so much R&D into the development of their chemical sunscreens, and they've been doing sunscreen for a long time. These brands I would put on a pedestal when it comes to making good chemical sunscreens. Neutrogena, for example, Johnson & Johnson will not release a chemical sunscreen to the market that does not hold its UVA protection, 85% of its UVA protection after hours of intense sun lamp exposure. So they really do a lot of additional testing. I can't say the same for other smaller independent brands. However, if you're using a sunscreen from a smaller independent brand, you like it, you wear it consistently, keep doing it. It's not wrong. Keep doing it. But if you're in the store and you have apprehension, this is something that I would encourage you to choose, Neutrogena or La Roche-Posay. I have been sponsored by both of those companies, both here on YouTube and on Instagram, as a disclosure. But the reason I have been sponsored by those brands is because I recommend them and agree to the sponsorship after always recommending them. So, that's my bias, but I do encourage you to consider those if you're feeling conflicted about how there's potential variability. When it comes to sunscreens, you cannot determine how good a sunscreen is going to be at protecting you by reading the ingredient list. This is a common myth as well. People will say like, oh, you need to look for a zinc oxide sunscreen that has X percent of, zinc. You need to look for this percentage of filters. And that is false. The percentage of active ingredients does not determine the final protection of the product. It boils down to the formulation overall. You could ask any cosmetic manufacturer who's ever tried to make a sunscreen. It's very difficult actually to formulate sunscreens, and it's not simply, you can't transform a SPF 30 product to an SPF 50 product simply by adding more filters or simply by adding more zinc oxide. It doesn't work that way. It's actually very difficult, and it boils down to formulation overall and inactive ingredients. And honestly, I'm not a cosmetic chemist, but I do know that much. You will fail if all you do is look at the percentages and try and compare it. You're wasting your time doing that. So I discourage people from, trying to analyze ingredients. I know there are online calculators, but those do not take into account inactive ingredients. And inactive ingredients and the consistency of the vehicle overall portend the final protection. It's not merely the percentage of active ingredients. And I always point this out to you guys who are still convinced of this. If you go into the drugstore, you will find a very high percentage of zinc oxide in a diaper rash cream. It will not protect you from a burn. It's not formulated properly. So this idea that percentage of actives is what is going to determine final SPF is very, misleading. However, thicker formulations tend to offer more protection. They tend to coat the skin more evenly. I've pointed this out in other videos, that skin it's not a flat sheet. It's textured, and one coat of a sunscreen, it misses the epidermal markings. That's one reason to reapply. But the thinner the sunscreen, the more lightweight, you're more likely to have more uncovered territory. So a thicker formulation is a good idea. Thicker is not always aesthetically pleasing though, which I think is part of what fed into the downfall, if you will, of the Korean sunscreens most recently. They were formulated to be a watery consistency. And I think that ultimately can influence the final protection of the product and the reproducibility of those measures of sun protection. I also get questions about people wanting to know, well, can we just get some sunscreens and use a UV camera to compare them? You can't. UV cameras do not work that way. UV cameras will only show you how good you are at putting sunscreen on. They're helpful for showing where you missed, skip areas, but they actually cannot tell you that the sunscreen on the skin is actually protecting it. So it doesn't give you that kind of information. So no, the UV camera thing is not a way to compare and contrast different sunscreens. Merely is a helpful tool to show you how good of an applier you are. Last but not least, I do recommend when it comes to choosing a sunscreen to go with a higher SPF. For example, I personally strongly recommend the La Roche-Posay SPF 100 Melt-In Sunscreen Milk, but anything 50 and above would be a great choice. Why? Several reasons. First of all, we know that people under apply sunscreen to begin with. That is one of the main reasons we encourage people to reapply, is to, keep putting it on to ensure that you at least get the amount that you need. And because people under apply, it's been shown that using a higher SPF actually gets you closer to a good SPF. And in these rarer situations where the SPF on the label, maybe it's not reproducible and it ends up being an actual lower SPF, like what has happened with Purito and these other Korean brands, you are at least likely to be at a good SPF. So always shoot for higher. I recommend that. Initially, many years ago I didn't, because we know that on paper there's really not much difference between the protection afforded by a lower versus a higher SPF. But in reality, in real world use, the way people actually apply sunscreen, it makes a huge difference. So I would encourage you to go with a higher SPF, always reapply sunscreen, wear it every day. I mean, these are the data-driven outcomes. Wearing it daily, reapplying it, higher is better. And we don't have data to tell you choose from this country or that country or this percentage or that percentage. We do know that the final protection afforded by a sunscreen boils down to the formulation overall, and you're not going to be able to figure that out just by reading labels. So I really hope that Purito, sounds like they are working on their sunscreen to get it better. And I think some of these other brands are, so that's great. Hopefully, they'll re-release a good sunscreen, and you can go back to using it and feel good about it. I don't think that, and to be clear, these brands, while you should always question the motives behind companies, their intention was not to harm anyone. When all of this first came out, you guys were asking me to comment on it, and I didn't, because I didn't really know what to say. I don't like outrage-based things where there's not, you're not aware of the facts. And so I didn't comment at that time, and I've taken a long time to comment on it because, there's been little by little new pieces of information come out, because honestly, it takes a long time to do these tests and to do them correctly. Anyways, guys, that's what I can tell you about sunscreen. Yes, you can trust it. Do know that it's not a perfect thing, and it should not be the only thing that you rely on. You need those, other behaviors, not sunbathing, being mindful of your sun exposure, also wearing sun protective clothing, broad brimmed hats, sun protective gloves, glasses, these things. Sunscreen is it's not a coat of armor. And it's just another thing to reduce the burden of damage, It's not going to offer 100% protection. I hope this video was helpful to you guys. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and as always, don't forget, sunscreen and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye.